Biblical giants, myth or truth. For centuries, one of the most intriguing, controversial, and even frightening themes in the Bible has been the giants, the Nephilim. They appear briefly but hauntingly in Genesis, are mentioned again in Numbers, and have left their mark throughout the entirety of the Old Testament. Who were they? Where did they come from? Why did God destroy the world with the Great Flood shortly after their appearance? And most importantly, does their dark legacy still affect humanity today? This article will guide you through the entire biblical picture, comparing key passages, the original Hebrew language, ancient Jewish tradition, and biblical theology to uncover the truth about the Nephilim, not based on speculation, but on the Word of God. The first appearance of Nephilim. Genesis 6, spiritual historical context before Genesis 6. To properly understand Genesis chapter 6, we cannot read it as an isolated story, much less as an ancient myth. The Bible never records events in isolation. Each event is the inevitable result of a series of spiritual choices spanning many generations. Genesis 1:2 describes a perfect order of creation. Mankind was created in the image of God, given dominion over the earth, living in direct communion with the Creator. But in Genesis 3, this order is broken. The fall of Adam and Eve was not merely a moral transgression, but an intrusion of the fallen spiritual world into God's creative order. The serpent was not simply an animal. Revelation 12:9 calls it Satan, the deceiver of the whole world. At the moment of judgment, God revealed what many readers might skim over. Your offspring and her offspring, Genesis 3:15. This was not just a curse. This was the first prophecy in the Bible. It announced that from now on, human history would revolve around two lineages. The lineage of the woman, through which the Messiah would come. The lineage of the serpent, a force seeking to sabotage the plan of redemption. From that moment, the world was no longer neutral. History became a battleground between two kingdoms, two lineages, Cain and C. More than just morality. Genesis chapters 4 and 5 are not boring genealogies. They are a spiritual map of post-Eden humanity. The Cain lineage. Building cities. Genesis 4:17. Developing civilization, art, and technology. But there were no altars, no worship of God Lamech, descendants of Cain, boasted of killing and taking 70 times 7 revenge. Genesis 4:23-24. This was a culture of pride, violence, and self-importance. The Say lineage, in contrast, Genesis 4:26 records a short but extremely important sentence. Then people began to call upon the name of the Lord. This speaks not only of religious action, but of the maintenance of a spiritual covenant. At first glance, one might think this is merely a moral difference, but the Bible is preparing for something far more serious: the forbidden mixing of two worlds. Read the original text of Genesis 6-14, the most controversial Bible passage. When mankind began to multiply on the earth and bore daughters, the sons of God saw that the daughters of men were beautiful, and they married whoever they chose. The Lord said, "My spirit will not remain with them forever, for they are flesh. Their lifespan will be 120 years. In those days, there were giants, Nephilim, on the earth. And even afterward, when the sons of God had relations with the daughters of men and bore children to them, these were the mighty men of old, men of renown." Just 4 sentences, but explains why the flood occurred, reveals a sin that transcends human limits, and opens up a recurring theme throughout the Bible: the corruption of the human race. Sons of God, an analysis of the Hebrew language. The Hebrew phrase B'nai Elohim, B'nai Elohim, is not ambiguous. Throughout the Old Testament, every time this phrase appears, it refers to spiritual entities, never to ordinary human beings. Job 1 to 6. The sons of God appear before him. Job 2 to 1. Job 38, 7. The sons of God rejoice at creation. If the author of Genesis wanted to refer to the descendants of She, or righteous people, he had many other words to use. The choice of B'nai Elohim was a deliberate theological decision, making anyone they choose a deliberate rebellion. This phrase reflects the pattern of sin in Eden: seeing, desire. Taking this was not a covenant marriage, but a usurpation that crossed the boundaries set by God. Jude 1 to 6-7 later confirms that there were angels who did not keep their place, but left their own dwelling place. Nephilims, not just tall people. The word Nephilim comes from the Nephal root, fallen. This shows that the issue is not just size, but a fundamentally corrupted spiritual nature. The Bible calls them ancient warriors, famous people. This is why every ancient civilization tells of demigod heroes, gods mating with humans. It is not imagination, but a distorted memory of a real event. God's reaction, not just anger. The Lord saw how great the wickedness of mankind was on the earth. Genesis 6 to 5. This wickedness is not just an act, but a distorted nature. If the messianic lineage is corrupted, the plan of redemption will collapse. The flood is not an impulsive act, but a spiritual surgery to save humanity. 120 years, the final period of grace. 120 years is not just a lifespan, but the time God patiently waited while Noah preached righteousness. 2 Peter 2 to 5. This is grace before judgment. Who are the sons of God? Asterisk, asterisk. If Genesis 6 is the door, then the phrase sons of God is the key. The entire story of the Nephilim, the great flood, and global judgment, whether it stands or falls, depends on how we understand these four words. For centuries, attempts have been made to downplay the meaning of this phrase, not because the Bible is unclear, but because its meaning is so terrifying. But if we are faithful to the biblical text, the answer is not as ambiguous as many believe. Biblical comparison. B'nai Elohim was never a man in the original Hebrew. The phrase B'nai Elohim literally means sons of God. This is not a poetic expression, but a fixed theological term. Look at how the Bible uses this phrase elsewhere. Job 1 to 6. And one day the sons of God came to appear before the Lord, and Satan came among them. No serious commentator would suggest this is a man or a descendant of Caesar. The context is entirely spiritual. Angels, Satan, and the throne of God. Job 2 to 1. The sentence structure, context, and meaning are exactly the same as Job 1 to 6. Job 38 to 7. When the sons of God rejoiced together. This was the time of the creation of the earth, before humankind existed. It couldn't be Adam, nor could it be his descendants. The inevitable conclusion. Throughout the Old Testament, B'nai Elohim always refers to spiritual entities. If Genesis 6 suddenly used this phrase to refer to humankind, it would be the only time in the Bible that there is no explanatory sign, completely contrary to how the Bible is written. Three main perspectives, and why only one is text-friendly. In the history of biblical interpretation, there are three main perspectives on the sons of God. Perspective 1, the lineage of Caesar arguments. Sons of God equals descendants of Caesar. Daughters of humans equals descendants of Cain. Serious issues. The Bible never calls the lineage of Caesar B'nai Elohim. Marriage between two lineages cannot produce giants. God would not destroy the world simply because of a false marriage. Perspective 2, kings and nobles. Arguments. Sons of God are self-proclaimed divine kings. Issues. No Hebrew linguistic evidence. Does not explain the Nephilim. Does not fit the style of Genesis perspective. 3. The fallen angels. It is argued that Bene Elohim were angels. They crossed the boundaries assigned to them. They gave birth to Nephilim. This is the only viewpoint that is linguistically consistent, is biblically consistent, was accepted by ancient Jews and the early church. Ancient Jewish tradition. The Book of Enoch and the Watchers. Before the New Testament, the Jews already had a very clear understanding of Genesis 6, the Book of Enoch, 1 Enoch. Although not included in the present-day Hebrew Bible, 1 Enoch, is quoted directly in Jude 1:14-15, was widely known in the first century. This book describes angels called watchers descending to earth, taking human women, giving birth to gigantic, violent, man-eating creatures. It is important to emphasize, Enoch did not create a new story, but briefly explained what Genesis 6 already stated. New Testament confirms, not a legend. The New Testament does not shy away from this issue. Jude 1-6. But the angels who did not keep their places, but abandoned their dwellings, he has kept them in chains forever. Peter 2-4-5. For if God had not spared the angels who sinned, but cast them into the abyss. Peter directly links the angels' sin to Noah's time and the global judgment. This is no coincidence. Why is this important? If the sons of God were merely human beings, the flood would become excessive. The Nephilim would become inexplicable. The urgency of judgment would lose its meaning. But if they were fallen angels, we understand why the created order is threatened, why the messianic lineage needs protection, and why God intervened so drastically. The sons of God are not symbols, not moral metaphors, but real entities that have transcended the spiritual boundary. Genesis 6 is not mythology. It is spiritual history hidden within 4 verses of Scripture. Nephilim and the flood. Why did God destroy the world? If Genesis 6 only spoke of human wickedness, the flood would seem like an overly harsh reaction. But the Bible shows that the issue goes beyond morality. It touches upon the very nature of human life. This is not a story about ordinary sinners. This is a story about the decay of the human race. Jehovah saw the wickedness, not just the actions. Jehovah saw the wickedness of mankind upon the earth, and every thought of their hearts was evil. Genesis 6-5. Many people read this verse and think of crime, violence, moral decay. But the Bible doesn't stop at actions. Genesis 6:12. God looked upon the earth, and behold, it was corrupted, for all flesh had corrupted its way upon the earth. The word corrupted, shahath, is repeated several times, meaning damaged, deformed, no longer conforming to its original form. This shows that the problem is not just individual sin, but that the entire order of creation has been distorted. Genetic degeneration. What the Bible subtly means. When the sons of God marry the daughters of men, the result is not just sin, but a mixed-race generation. Genesis 6-4 clearly states, they bear children for themselves. This is not a metaphor. These are true descendants, with bodies, influence, and power. If the human race becomes mixed race, then the promise in Genesis 3:15 is threatened. The lineage of women is no longer pure. The messianic plan is at risk of being destroyed. The great flood is not just judgment, but an act of protecting the covenant of redemption. All flesh, the scope of decay. I will destroy mankind, whom I have created from the face of the earth, from man to animal. Genesis 6-7. The question often asked is, why are animals also destroyed? The answer lies in Genesis 6:12. All flesh has corrupted its ways. This shows that corruption is not limited to humans. but has spread to the entire ecosystem. This is a sign of profound spiritual intervention, not just social sin. Noah, the righteous man amidst a corrupt generation. In the midst of a world on the verge of extinction, the Bible suddenly introduces a name. Noah was righteous, blameless in his generation. Noah walked with God. Genesis 6-9. The key phrase here is blank in his generation. The Hebrew word tamim temim means intact, spotless, unmixed. This word is not only used for morality, but also to describe a spotless, sacrificial animal. Exodus 12-5 describes something that is true to its original form. This implies that Noah's lineage was not mixed with other species. Noah, not just a righteous man, but the one who was kept too. Peter 2-5 calls Noah a preacher of righteousness. For 120 years, he built the ark, preached, warned. In a world dominated by the Nephilim, rampant violence, distorted truth, Noah became the last vestige of true humanity. The Great Flood, God's spiritual surgery. I will destroy mankind, whom I have created, from the face of the earth, for I regret having made them. Genesis 6-7. I will destroy them along with the earth. Genesis 6:13. The great flood was not a sudden fit of God's wrath, nor was it an unwarranted act of cruelty against humanity. If we read Genesis 6 inches, the spiritual context of chapters 1-5, we will see the great flood was a life or death surgery, aimed at saving the plan of redemption that was seriously threatened. An unfinished question. If the great flood had destroyed the Nephilim, cleansed the earth, preserved a pure lineage through Noah, why did the Nephilim still appear afterward? Who was Enoch? Who was Rephaim? Where did Goliath come from? The Bible recognizes this question and does not shy away from it. Bible confirms. Giants appeared after the great flood. A key Bible verse is often overlooked. In those days, there were Nephilim on the earth, and also afterward, when the sons of God came to the daughters of men. Genesis 6:4. The phrase, and also afterward, indicates that the Bible does not consider Nephilim a phenomenon that existed only before the great flood. This is clearly reinforced in Moses' time. We saw Nephilim there. We were like grasshoppers before them. Numbers 13:33. This was more than 1,000 years after the great flood. The lineage of Anak. Anak, Rephaim, Mi, Suzi. The Bible uses many different names for the same reality. Anak, Anakim. Rephaim, Mi, Suzi. The Emi were numerous and as large as the Anak people. Deuteronomy 2:10. The land of Rephaim. The Anak people lived there. Deuteronomy 2:20-21. This is not a local legend. These are specific lineages, geographically and historically significant. Goliath, undeniable evidence. Goliath is not described as an ordinary large soldier. His height was 6 cubits in one span. 1 Samuel 17-4. His shaft was like a weaver's loom. 1 Samuel 17-7. And more importantly, Goliath was a Gathite. 1 Samuel 17-4. Gath was one of the 5 Philistine cities where the Bible records. Only Anakites remained in Gath, Gaza, and Ashdod. Joshua 11:22. Goliath was no exception. He was a product of a remaining lineage. So how did the Nephilims return? The Bible doesn't say it directly, but it suggests 3 biblical possibilities. The recurrence of spiritual conflict. The angels did not keep their place. Jude 1-6. There is no verse that says all fallen angels were immediately imprisoned. The remaining lineage through marriage. Some Jewish traditions suggest that Mixedness may have crept into the human lineage after the flood, though not on a global scale. Satan's strategy to hinder the Messeth from Genesis 3:15. The offspring of the woman will crush your head. Each time the messianic lineage draws near, spiritual opposition flares up more intensely. Why did God not cause another flood? After the flood, God made a covenant. I will no longer use the flood to destroy all flesh. Genesis 9:11. From here, the method changed. No longer global destruction, but rather the purification of regions through Israel. You shall not make a covenant with them. Deuteronomy 7:2. The conquests of Canaan were not invasions, but a continuation of spiritual surgery. Where does this question lead us? If the Nephilim do not completely disappear, continue to appear and are destroyed in waves, then the war is not just about the flesh, for our struggle is not against flesh and blood, but against rulers. Ephesians 6:12. The great flood did not end the war. It only moved the war to a new phase. The Nephilim after the flood were the remaining traces evidence of a protracted war and a warning that the enemy never gives up. Nephilims after the flood. How did they return? The great flood ended. The earth was renewed. Only 8 survivors emerged from the ark. So the question that puzzles and even avoids is, why did the Nephilim still appear after the great flood? If everything was destroyed, where did they come from? The Bible is not silent on this, but the answer is scattered and only becomes clear when we piece the fragments together. Numbers 13. The return of the Nephilims, more than 1,000 years after the great flood. As the Israelites prepared to enter the promised land, 12 spies were sent to scout Canaan. They returned with a shocking report. We also saw giants there, descendants of Anak, of the Nephilim. We saw ourselves as grasshoppers, and they saw us as well. Numbers 13:33. This is a Bible verse that cannot be ignored. The name Nephilim is mentioned directly, not symbolic, not metaphorical. This confirms that the Nephilim phenomenon did not end at Genesis 6. Anak, Rephaim, Emim, different names. After the Great Flood, the Bible rarely uses the word Nephilim again, but uses different names for the same group of people. Rephaim, that land was also counted as the land of the Rephaim. Deuteronomy 3. Emim. The Emim were there before, a great people, numerous and tall like the Anak. Deuteronomy 2:10. Anak, you are about to cross the Jordan River, to drive out the great and powerful nations, a great and tall nation, the descendants of Anak. Deuteronomy 9:1-2. Repeated characteristics: unusually tall, fearsome, occupying fortified cities, associated with Canaan, the cursed land. Genesis 9:25. Joshua, the purification of the promised land. Many people today ask, why did God command the complete destruction of the Canaanites? The answer is not just moral, but spiritual and genetic. Joshua 11:21-22. Joshua destroyed the Anakites from the mountains, leaving only remnant at Gaza, Gath, and Ashdod. This is a crucial detail. Not all the Anakites were annihilated. Some survived in the Philistine cities, and it is from there that a familiar name would emerge: Goliad and the descendants of the giants. Samuel 17. Goliath, nearly 3 meters tall, armor weighing over 50 kilograms, warrior from his youth. The Bible does not call him a Nephilim, but all descriptions match. Samuel 21:16-22. These 4 men were descendants of the giants of Gath. Goliath was not an isolated case. He belonged to a lineage. How did the lineage return? 3 biblical possibilities. The Bible does not state it directly, but allows us to infer it within the framework of God's Word. Possibility 1. Mixed blood existed within Noah's family. Some scholars suggest that mixed blood may have existed indirectly through the wives of Noah's sons. This is a hypothesis, not explicitly confirmed in the Bible. Possibility 2. Repeated spiritual invasion. Jude 1-6 shows. Not all fallen angels were imprisoned. Some were imprisoned for particularly serious sins. This opens the possibility that the violation of Genesis 6 may be repeated to a limited extent. Possibility 3. Most likely, the lineage is preserved and spread. The post-flood Nephilim were not widespread globally, but concentrated in Canaan, the very place where God led his people. This explains why the promised land needed to be purified. The conquest was not just a territorial war, but a spiritual war. The prophets, the traces of the giants. Isaiah 26-14. The dead will not rise again. The giants, Rephaim, will not rise again. The word Rephaim here doesn't just refer to the dead, but to a special kind of entity, eternally judged. Ezekiel 32-27, referring to the mighty men of ancient times who have fallen into Hades. This language directly echoes Genesis 6. Why is God merciless truth? Because this is not just about sinful humans. If this lineage continues to exist, continues to spread, the history of redemption will be distorted. Therefore, the Anakites must be eliminated. The strongholds must be destroyed. There must be no compromise. The Nephilim, after the great flood, no longer dominate the world, but hide in strategic areas, waiting for the moment to confront God's people, and each time they appear, God acts to eliminate them. The final question: if the Nephilim had ever sought to destroy the messianic lineage before his coming, would a similar strategy have been employed before his return? Goliath and the spiritual confrontation. When the name of Jehovah confronts the generation of giants, the story of David and Goliath is often recounted as a simple moral lesson. A weak boy defeats a giant through faith. But if we stop there, we miss the deepest meaning of the Bible. This is not just a personal battle. This is a spiritual confrontation, symbolic and prophetic. Goliath, more than just a tall man. Samuel 17-4. From the Philistine camp came a giant named Goliath. From Gath, 6 cubits and 1 span in height. His height of nearly 3 meters is not a detail meant to impress. The Bible intentionally emphasizes this. Goliath came from Gath, one of the places where the Anakites remained. Joshua 11:22 belonged to the lineage of giants. 2 Samuel 21:22. He was not an anomaly, but a product of a lineage. Arm, an image of challenging God's order. Samuel 17-5-7. Bronze armor weighing over 50 kilograms. Bronze helmet, large shield, spear like a weaver's shaft. This is not just a military description. This is an image of invincibility in the human eye. Goliath represents physical strength, the technology of war, the pride of the world. Goliath's challenge, not just an insult. 1 Samuel 17:10. I challenge the army of Israel today. Send one man to fight me. This was not just a military challenge. This was a direct insult to God, because Israel was not an ordinary people. They were a covenant people, the army of the Lord of armies. When Goliath challenged Israel, he was challenging God himself. The fear of Israel. When God's people see with the eyes of the flesh. 1 Samuel 17:11. When Saul and all Israel heard these words, they were terrified and greatly afraid. The heartbreaking thing was not Goliath's strength, but that God's people had forgotten who they were. They looked at height, looked at armor, looked at strength, but did not look at the covenant. David the one who saws what others do not see. When David appeared, he did not ask, "How tall is he? How heavy is his armor?" He asked. Samuel 17:26. Who is this uncircumcised Philistine who dares to insult the army of the living God? David did not see Goliath as a warrior. He saw him as an outsider. David's weapons. Spiritual conflict. Saul wanted David to wear the king's armor, but David refused. Samuel 17:39. I am not accustomed to using such things. David came out with a sling, 5 stones, and a name greater than any other name, declaration of spiritual war. Samuel 17:45. You come to me with sword, spear, and shield, but I come to you in the name of the Lord of hosts, the God of the armies of Israel, whom you have insulted. This is the heart of the whole story. This battle is not a man against man, but a name of God against a colossal race. The kick, not a chance. The stone flew straight, struck his forehead, where there was no armor. This was God's precision, not David's luck. The cut-off head, a theological symbol. David beheaded Goliath with his own sword. This image echoes Genesis 3:15. The offspring of the woman will crush your head. This is a prophetic victory. Sure, Goliath, the shadow of the final enemy Goliath, a giant, a challenger to God's people. Defeated by an anointed man, David is a foreshadowing of the Messiah, not by strength, but by obedience in the name of God. Goliath did not lose because he was weak. He lost because he stood outside the covenant. He challenged the name of Jehovah. David's victory wasn't because of the stone, but because he knew who he represented. Today's Goliaths may not be 3 meters tall, but still challenge the faith, still strike fear into God's people. Will you look at them with your fleshly eyes, or in the name of Jehovah? The true purpose of the Nephilims. The war against the plan of redemption. Nephilim are not a historical accident. They are not a random biological anomaly, and they do not exist simply to frighten people. According to the Bible, the Nephilim are a deliberate strategy, born from the calculated rebellion of the fallen spiritual world. Nephilims, not just a physical threat. If the Nephilim were merely tall people, strong warriors, then God would not need the great flood. Human history has always been violent, but there was only one time when God said, I will destroy mankind which I have created from the face of the earth. Genesis 6-7. This shows that Nephilim represented something beyond ordinary sin. The invasion of the fallen spiritual world, Genesis 6, does not describe humans seeking out angels, but rather the sons of God descending. This is a violation of boundaries, a disruption of the creative order, heaven's unauthorized invasion of earth. Jude 1-6. The angels did not keep their places, but left their own dwellings. The Nephilim are tangible evidence that the fallen spiritual world not only tempts, but seeks to seize material reality. The conspiracy to destroy the Messiah line from the beginning. Satan knew one thing: the lineage of the woman will crush his head. Genesis 3:15. If he could not restrain God, then he would defile the lineage. The Nephilim appeared just before the great flood, at the very moment when the human race was being corrupted on a large scale. If every family were mixed, every generation were deformed, the Messiah would not be able to come in a pure human body. The great flood, therefore, was not merely a judgment, but an act of saving, a future of redemption. Nephilims, a replica of creation. God created man in his image. The fallen world imitated creation, but created a distorted copy. Nephilim were not entirely angelic, not entirely human, not entirely belonging to any world. This was a direct insult to the image of God. Why are Nephilims always associated with violence? Genesis 6:11. The earth was full of violence. Nephilim were heroes, were famous people, were rulers by force. Violence was not a byproduct, but their very nature, because they were born from rebellion, usurpation, disobedience to God's order. The war does not end at the great flood after the great flood. The Nephilim no longer ruled the globe, but concentrated in strategic regions. Canaan, where the descendants of Abraham would pass through, where the Messiah would come. It was not a coincidence. It was a calculated confrontation. David, the Messiah, and the final victory, Goliath fell. The giant was beheaded, but that was only a foreshadowing. Colossians 2:15. He removed the rulers and authorities, exposed them publicly, and conquered them by the cross. The cross is the final blow. Against all the schemes of the fallen world, a warning to all generations, Nephilim teach us something terrifying. The enemy doesn't just want you to sin, it wants to distort what God created. Today, the intrusion is no longer through giants, but through thought, identity. The denial of God's image in man. Nephilim are not the center of the Bible. Christ is the center, but Nephilim show. Spiritual warfare is real. The plan of salvation is always opposed, and God always wins. A dark legacy. Impact on today. When the spiritual war is not over, if the Nephilim were merely an ancient story, if the fallen angels were just a past event, then the New Testament would not have recounted it with such a serious tone. But the apostles did not consider it an end. They considered it a cautionary lesson for the last days. The New Testament does not forget Genesis 6:2, Peter 2-4. For if God did not restrain the angels who sinned, but cast them into the abyss and put them in the darkness to await judgment, is not speaking generally about Satan, is speaking about a specific group of angels who committed such serious sins that they are imprisoned now. Jude 1-6. The angels who did not keep their positions, but abandoned their dwelling places, he has imprisoned them in chains forever. This language directly echoes Genesis 6. Abandoned their positions, abandoned their dwelling places, crossed the boundaries assigned to them. This is not the ordinary sin of angels, but a rebellion that encroaches upon the human world. Why were some angels imprisoned and some not? This is the key question. The Bible shows that not all fallen angels were imprisoned, only those who committed a particularly grave sin. What was that sin? Jude 1-7 states, as Sodom and Gomorrah gave themselves over to lust and to strange flesh. The phrase strange flesh refers to a violation of the order of creation. This is directly linked to angels, human flesh, and the immediate judgment of God for the hybrids. Nephilims disappear. But their ideas do not disappear after the apostles. Nephilim no longer appeared publicly, but traces of their ideas persisted. Greek and Roman mythology, half-human gods, demigod heroes, entities higher than humans. This is no coincidence. This is a distorted memory of a real event, influenced today, not through physical figures. Today, the fallen world doesn't need giants. The strategy has changed. If in the past it was physical immorality, today it is intellectual immorality, distortion of identity, destruction of the image of God in man. 2 Corinthians 11:14. Satan disguised himself as an angel of light. Today's infiltration is more subtle, not coming by force, but by lies wrapped in light. As in the days of Noah, a warning from Christ, Matthew 24-37. As in the days of Noah, so will the coming of the Son of Man be. Jesus did not say, merely eating, drinking, and marrying. He said, a similar spiritual context. Noah's days were widespread corruption, blurred boundaries. People no longer knew who they were. The true dark heritage, the denying of the Creator the Nephilim failed to prevent the Messiah from coming, but their legacy is a continuous effort to deny God's order. Today, people redefine themselves, deny creation, seek to transcend and become gods. This is the echo of the words in Eden. You shall be like God. Genesis 3-5. The final hope, victory, is destined. Although the dark legacy still resonates, the Bible ends with victory, not darkness. Revelation 20-1. 3. Satan is bound. His power is put to an end. Deception is no more. No more Nephilim. No more free fallen angels. No more mixed race. The legacy of the Nephilim is not giants, but the struggle to reclaim what humanity believes about itself. Nephilims, a warning for the final generation. The story of the Nephilim was not recorded to sow fear. The Bible never recounts history merely to satisfy human curiosity. Every page of the Bible carries a warning, an invitation, and a choice. The Nephilim are proof that the spiritual world is real, not a symbol or myth. Rebellion, whether from humans or spiritual entities, does not escape God's judgment. God's plan of redemption is never destroyed, no matter how deep the darkness penetrates. In Noah's time, people were not judged because they did not know. They were judged because they knew, but chose to ignore it. They eat, drink, marry, build, dream, while spiritual corruption has reached the very roots of humanity. And Jesus himself warned, as in the days of Noah, so will it be in the days of the Son of Man. Matthew 24-37. This does not mean that the Nephilim will appear exactly as before, but it means that deception will be more sophisticated. The blending of light and darkness will be harder to distinguish. People will become so accustomed to wrongdoing that they no longer see the danger. The warning for the last generation is not to force an house, be afraid, but be watchful. Be watchful so that remain faithful. Protect spiritual purity. Not trade truth for convenience. Not call darkness light. For as in Noah's time, the door of the ark was not closed by man, but by God himself. And when that door closes, it is no longer a time for debate, but a time to face the eternal truth. But here is the good news. Today, that door is still open. Christ is still calling. Grace is still available to those who return to the truth. The Nephilim remind us that darkness once invaded the world. The cross declares that darkness has been defeated. And the last generation is called not to fear, but to stand firm, faithfully, and ready. Blessed is the one who is watchful and keeps his cloak. Revelation 16:15. The final question is not, who are the Nephilim, but rather, when the Son of Man comes, where will he find you standing?